So, Micah, tell us the pain that Form Infotech solves for manufacturing companies.
All right. First, I'm going to kind of lay out some of the differences that manufacturing has specific, if you don't mind, so that we can kind of, there's lots of different pains, and different manufacturing has different pain points. So the big difference between manufacturing and other industries I wanted to talk about first. Is that okay?
That's fantastic.
Okay, so first off, manufacturing, like any other industry, any other business for that matter, they have their office needs. So office needs are pretty much shared across the lines. Those aren't really specific to manufacturing, but they still exist. With an office, you have office workers, you have staffing, you have sales, marketing, design, your task workers. Owners often work in an office environment. More specifically to manufacturing, though, you have what are production floor environments. So production floor is very much staff like an office, but literally has a lot of moving parts, including the personnel that work it. So those moving parts include machines that have large input output data requirements, materials coming in, materials going out, and they need to keep track of all of that. Uh, Likewise, you have warehousing specifications and needs. Those warehouses have to be able to track and maintain numbers and data, um, have to be able to also input materials, store, hopefully remember where you stored things, and then output material as necessary. With all of those moving pieces, you have logistics. Manufacturing logistics is literally the crux, the core of the data that you have to maintain. It has to be clean, it has to be accurate, it has to be as close to live and real time as possible. And then all of that comes together when you have multiple locations. So manufacturing, unlike just basic office needs, has all of those that kind of stack together and create all those pain points of managing and maintaining your data and keeping everything flowing.
Awesome. That's really interesting. So, let's talk more about like where would areas of crossover be between what your office staff and what your warehouse staff would be? Would there be crossover in maintaining that data like through maybe their ERP system?
Yeah, so normally you have a single point of truth or an ERP system, a manufacturing platform. An example that is very popular right now is Sage, has manufacturing, and then you have add-ons that stack into that database system that would then control or hook together your logistics, your warehousing, your pipelines, different supply chains, and give you that data, that single point of truth I've said. um, because if you don't have a single point of truth, you have lots of redundant data. That's when things start becoming messy.
Gotcha. Thank you. So, Micah, from your experience, what are the main mistakes or maybe the just the different areas of improvement that manufacturing companies can make to solve these pain points?
So one of the biggest pain point again is keeping everything together in one location and as close to real time as possible.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of older manufacturing companies, very mature manufacturing companies, are still paper process.
Gotcha.
Getting that to a digital format, and then instead of keeping them maybe the digital format spread out between different locations, let's say you have 10, 15 locations, even worldwide, global sometimes, where data is stored, putting it in a single location. So that's where we as a cloud company can actually make it available on a global reach, but in a single location that is very robust and accessible.
Okay. So I'm gonna just make an assumption here that manufacturing companies have high level needs when it comes to IT, whether it be their network equipment, the cloud management that you're talking about, the single point of truth. So the likelihood of them having their own on-site IT managers is probably pretty high. So how do you partner with an on-site IT manager, and how do you delineate roles between what Forum Infotech does and what the on-site managers do?
So one of the best actual examples of that is exactly what you just said, where we have maybe a high level IT manager with our partner companies that they can literally have boots on the ground, so to speak, within the office and the production warehouse floors, um, getting that feedback and finding the needs, pushing the company forward. Whereas we can partner with them to make sure that those needs are being met. For instance, if a company wants to go from paper to digital for warehouse management, we can line them up and basically line the pipe for them so that they can implement a solution that meets their needs. We will ease them into that, work with them, create the project, and finish it out. Make sure that they get what they need. They don't need that exact expertise, in the trenches for the IT. We can provide that for them. Likewise, if they have staff that are lower level in each site, we can integrate with them on a lower level to make sure that systems are plugged in, they're configured correctly across the board, so that maybe one IT staff at one location only manages that one location, but we can keep that whole umbrella over the entire company, solid and standardized. It really creates a much more smooth and even experience for all the staff.
Yes, it does. So let's say I'm the CEO of a manufacturing company, and one of the things that keeps me up at night are security concerns. Where would you start to address those concerns, and how would you help me to sleep a little better at night? Bring me some peace of mind.
So some of the biggest security concerns today, as we know, security concerns evolve, for manufacturing, is just the amount of people that often have their hands on the data. Um, Having that, the staffing come and go and access permissions is very important. In a single cloud environment, you can actually keep the data in a safe location, literally away from people's hands, whereas maybe they're accessing remote the data versus keeping it in their local computers. Um,
Mhm.
and then also, having very specific access control lists, permissions set, where you have the ability to make it so it's like what's called the least permission to perform your job. And that makes it so if somebody who's running a machine only needs to run that machine, they do not need to worry about having access to anything else.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're saying assigning permissions based on job function.
Yes, correct.
Okay, and additionally, as a manufacturing company, how concerned should I be about things like what you hear in the news, ransomware, phishing attacks, things of that nature?
Well, I mean, everybody at that point is they're vulnerable, I should say, to that. We call it security hardening. There's no way to get around the possibility of that. There's no way to actually stop it, but there's definitely things that we can do to make it harder, make it less likely that something like that would occur. Specifically in manufacturing, the cloud is the best way to. It's not like you put all your eggs in one basket, but you can protect a single point versus having everything spread around. So, for instance, you can back up a single uh, data point versus having multiple backups and tracking all of those, and maybe having one fail or slip under the rug. Um, and it makes it easier to track and maintain and monitor. as well as recover from any issues that may occur.
Okay, great. And going back to something that you said a moment ago, you mentioned it a few times. Manufacturing companies where their data resides in the cloud. So, if I have on-premise servers, what does the transition look like for me, for my company, to transition from everything on-premise to the cloud? Can you tell me more about that, please?
Yeah. So basically, what we would do for a migration or transitioning to the cloud is to find how your current environment works, work with your team to maybe pre-plan any future changes, and then create a appropriate project with timeline to literally pull everything that you're currently working on. And this is all done in concurrent to production, because if your production stops, obviously you're not making money. So we want to keep that going, replicate what you already have, do some cleanup if that's necessary, and then do a clean cutover. uh, it literally will create a replica environment in the cloud that no longer has any of the hardware faults or failures that are associated with an on-site.
What an exciting notion, manufacturing in the cloud. You know, if we have CEOs that have or companies in general that are working long term, working, they're used to seeing the flashing lights, they're used to the security, the form, the function of being on premise. What would you say to encourage them, maybe that you haven't mentioned today already? What would you say to encourage them to move to the cloud? And how would you ease and give them peace of mind that the cloud is just as secure, if not more secure, than the system they're used to working in?
So, I mean, there's a lot to be said there as well. The biggest one that I'm going to say for reasons why you would move to the cloud is just that singularity of being able to track and maintain and have single systems in the cloud. The cloud, it's obviously it's spread around throughout and replicated around the world, depending on the individual cloud that you use. But a lot of the issues with an on-prem, the hardware failures, the maintenance schedules, a lot of those single points of failure just disappear as soon as you move to a cloud environment. As far as the security is concerned, all of the three active clouds that are currently out there right now are fully ISO secured, certified. They are some of the most secure environments on the planet in regards to data and accessibility. Um, if they weren't, they wouldn't have a business model.
Mhm,
So comparing what you can provide as a single industry with a single environment on prem versus what these large companies are providing is they're far different in security basis for sure, far superior.
mhm. Interesting. Okay, great. Thank you. So, how would I know that everything that I have on premise, like my ERP system, Sage, NetSuite, whatever it is, how do I know that that will actually work in the cloud the way that it does on premise?
So that's the fun part, is at the base and the root of the cloud infrastructure, software wise is almost identical to what you have on prem. So if you're running a Sage environment on prem, we can scoop that software, scoop the data, immediately replicate it in the cloud environment, and you will never know the difference. Anything that runs on a Windows environment will run in the cloud. Anything that runs in Linux will run in Linux or on the cloud as well in the Linux environment. It's very robust and very easy to work with and migrate to.
Okay, so basically all the cloud is the same thing I have on premise, just as at a different location.
If your location is in hundreds of databases replicated across the globe, absolutely.
All right. So, last question for you. What steps do you take to help ensure manufacturing uptime?
So, the biggest, obviously, the biggest steps that we would take to do that, which is the most important, is the manufacturing uptime, is to have multiple replicated environments. Whereas if one point fails, it doesn't bring down anything else. You want to get rid of those single points of failure. So you have um, replications of those that we can immediately switch to that are running hot. You can do that in different regions even. So if you have an environmental disaster on the West Coast, in the United States, we have earthquakes. Maybe we have a failover environment on the East Coast. We click a button, snap our fingers, and it's hot. It's live. Likewise, we can automate that, so it's not even a manual process. Maybe the environment says, "Hey, I went down. Okay, we're switch over," and you never even know at that point.
Okay, great, Micah. Thank you so much for sharing your insight on today's webinar. Really appreciate your level of expertise and you bringing this information to our audience.
You're welcome.
Bye. Jason didn't stop recording, but I know he can cut this up. So,
I was gonna say, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
I mean, I added in a bunch more than the few questions that I sent. Is there anything else you want to talk about?